Friends and colleagues, welcome to the 50th webinar of Habitat Forum's series on rethinking cities, especially rethinking Indian cities. This is a special occasion for INHAF as we are hosting 50th webinar. We started last June and has covered many urban themes from slums to mobility to governance to water to technology to sanitation to climate change to economic growth and sustainability, even city and Gandhi. We had over 280 urban experts, professionals, and specialists share their ideas, thoughts, views, and perspectives on better planning, better management, and development of our cities. We have had more than 50 partners, local and international, in organizing this highly educative dialogue. On behalf of INHAF, I thank everybody for their help, support, and contribution. Without their assistance and guidance, this would not have been possible. I'm especially thankful to my colleagues at INHAF who have worked hard to make this event possible. We are grateful to this very distinguished panel of guests today who constitute webinar today called Indian City, Past, Present, and Future with India's celebrated architects and planners. It's not always not easy to get such outstanding professionals as Doshi Saab, Raj Rewal ji, Ranjit Sabikhi Saab, Gurmeet ji, Krishnan Saab, Edgar Ribeiro, and even Prem Chandavarkar together. They are witness to some 3 generations of India's development journey. They have been significant contributors to India's urban landscape. I'm not surprised at all that we have as many as 950 registrations to participate in this webinar. While we are at 50 webinars and hope and plan to continue further, it's only appropriate to ask some questions and share with you why we are doing this. What is the purpose? What do we hope to achieve by running this webinar series for over a year? Time has come not only to live in cities, work in cities, grow and prosper in cities, and dream our future in our cities. It is time to think about cities as well. And as COVID-19 has shown, an impending climate change and global warming is telling us that time has come also not only to think cities, but to rethink cities, rethink our cities. Cities are no longer asking for investment in money terms alone. They're asking for investment in new ideas, new perspectives, new vision, new technology, new creativity, and new ways of bringing economic growth, wealth, prosperity, happiness, and durable peace for our people. It's not only COVID and climate change that are asking for new ways of doing things. It is the slum dwellers, migrant labor, polluted rivers, depleting waters, water table, deteriorating air quality that compel Delhi High Court at one point of time to describe Delhi as India's political capital, as guest chamber. All these are asking for rethinking our cities. It's not only lack of development or inadequacy of development, but also nature and outcome of growth and development that is increasing and deepening inequality in our cities that necessitates rethinking. Cities are engines of economic growth. They are also sites of the greatest inequality. We need to figure out what is it about our cities as a system that generates so much of wealth on one side and so much squalor at the other side at the same time. And who does this thinking? Who does this rethinking? Only the governments, only the planners, only the professionals, only the politicians, only the World Bank? No, that is not enough. The conditions in which our cities are and could be in 10, 20, 30 more years, if we do not change our ways and do not tell ourselves that the governments, professionals, and consultants thinking alone is not enough. And if that happens, we would face very severe, difficult problems. Ensuring better cities, inclusive cities, productive cities, sustainable cities, people caring and environment friendly cities is a wider societal responsibility. Not only government must think for new answers and solutions to the problems, not only they must find alternative ways of doing things, we as a society must invest energy, skills, wisdom, and resources that we have in finding new solutions, alternative ways of doing things. This webinar series on rethinking city is an effort to take the urban challenge to the citizens, to the wider society, to you, to me, to younger generations, to the teaching and training institutions. It is to convey to everyone that the urban challenge is daunting, even if silent. We as a country, we as people, we as government cannot afford underperforming on this vital front. As the price for not meeting the urban challenge squarely and adequately is indeed very high. Both quality of people would suffer, and as cities are engines of growth, our ambition for a $5 trillion economy would suffer as well. There is a momentum already. Things are beginning to happen. Under, under several government programs, include Swachh Bharat, Pradhan Mantri Awas Yojana, Amrit, Smart City Mission, many things are happening. But much more remains to be done. And nothing less than a wider societal effort is adequate to meet the massive urban challenge. We need a progressive societal partnership for better cities and thereby a better nation. The series is a small little tiny effort in this direction. And I hope this process will continue. Many more will join. It is not enough to say or to do what we know to do. Time has come to do what is required to be done. Thank you very much for this presence. Thank you very much for your contribution. And thank you very much for being partner in this venture. Having given this introductory thing, I hand over my friend Prem Chandavarkar to take this further. We have a very distinguished panel to discuss how This distinguished panel of architects and planners saw cities in the past and how they see it now, and what is their perspective on cities that would emerge over a period of time. Thank you, Prem, and thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Kirtee. As Kirtee said, we have a very stellar panel today. Unfortunately, Mr. V Doshi is facing some technical problems in connecting, and he may not be able to connect. We hope he will be able to join, but we still have some very sound minds and voices with great experience to guide us in this discussion. The format will be that we will ask each speaker to make an opening statement of about between 7 and 10 minutes. And then after that, we will go to a moderator discussion, and we invite questions from the audience also. I request that audience questions are put in the Q&A box and not in the chat box, because the chat box will have other information, speaker bios, etc. So we might miss your question if you put it there. So please put it in the Q&A box, and I'll try and see how many questions we can field. We try and field as many as possible. So we will start. It is my pleasure to start with somebody who was my teacher from my student days, Professor Ranjit Sabiki. He's been in practice as an architect in New Delhi since 1961 and has a wide variety of experience in architectural education, practice, and urban design. He taught at the School of Planning and Architecture from 1959 to 1975, and has also been a visiting critic in urban design at Harvard University and at Washington University, St. Louis.
You can't hear me?
He has worked in the United Kingdom, and then as a principal in his own practice from 1961 onwards, doing some really major projects, won some very substantial competitions. His work is recognized in many awards and international and Indian exhibitions on architecture. Professor Sabiki, we request you to share your thoughts.
Thank you, Prem. Thank you for the very kind introduction. And, when I hear about all that has happened, what I've been through over the last 50 years, in many ways, it's a pleasure to recount, what one has experienced and what is happening in the country. Basically, I'd like to begin by saying that ours is a very large country with a very wide variety of past development in urban areas, in different parts conditioned by location, context, landscape, and history. In trying to evaluate what are the significant features of all this, one realizes that what holds our historic cities together is a strong sense of urban design. This has been my main concern and my passion in whatever I've checked and explored of the changes that have been happening. Along with this, of course, is the rich overlapping of multiple uses coupled with constant change. This, to me, is one of the most significant factors that I want to put across to this group today. That is, that cities are living organisms that are constantly changing, and our attempts to try and plan and to put across a rigid framework of development is very often misplaced if it does not take into account the fact that people change, lives change, conditions change, uses change, even in our entire structure of the city gradually keeps on changing. I have noticed, for instance, I have
Professor Sabiki, people.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'll speak
if you can come a little closer to the computer.
Is that better?
Yeah, it's not audible.
Okay. Well, All right, I'll try and put it a little louder. Now, what is not recognized today is this fundamental feature of constant change. In that sense, our towns and cities are living organisms, as I mentioned before. And these living organisms keep, you know, there are new kinds of things that enter into it, new ideas, new ways of doing things, new uses. Most importantly, I think I've seen that over the years, urban settlements have grown, and particularly in India, we have been through a massive process of growth over the last 50 years. You know, post-independence development, I mean, from a city of, uh, I go mainly, just if you look at Delhi alone, Delhi had a population of 50 lakhs in 1981. Today, it is over 23 lakhs, and it is still growing. Can everyone hear me clearly?
You could speak a little louder, and that's all.
Sabiki Saab is still not very good.
Okay.
Ankisha, can we do something at our end? Ankisha?
Oh, sir, it's from their his source and only.
Okay. Can you hear me better now?
Yeah, it's a little better. Maybe if you come a little closer to the computer, it would help. If you come a little closer to the computer, it would help.
Hello.
Siddiqui Saab, can you use earphone?
Okay. Can you hear me now?
Yeah, that's better.
Is it any better? I'm sorry, I have a slight problem with my computer, so that is why you are having this trouble today. But can you hear me now?
Yes,
Yes,
sir, you
yes.
can start.
Much
Is it
better.
better now?
Yeah.
Prem, can you hear me?
Yes,
Yeah,
sir, we
please go
can hear
ahead.
you.
Please go ahead.
Okay. Now, as I mentioned, in a city like Delhi, the growth has been from a size of a city of 50 lakhs in 1981 to over 230 lakhs today. Now, the fact that this growth has started in, and was recognized as far back as 1961 when they introduced the first new master plan for Delhi. Now, the master plan brought about a framework of development which was based on post-war development in Europe. It really did not recognize or attempt to study our own background and history of urban development and town and urban design. Although we have had a series, right across the country, we've got historical developments, we've got historic cities. They all vary from one place to another according to the location, the landscape, the surrounding. But there are also certain strong common features. And those common features constitute our traditional way of planning, which in a way is an organic kind of framework of growth, which has never been recognized. And I mean, even in all our teaching programs, we still tend to sort of define that planning is a way of allocating use zones for different areas. We don't realize that these uses keep constantly changing. I don't know how many of you, I could give you an example. I mean, like those of you who are familiar with Delhi, apart from the fact that it has grown steadily and is still growing, there are certain features which are strongly recognizable. Like right from the beginning, when they started doing the first master plan for Delhi, they realized that the area of the Delhi urban area was defined for future growth of Delhi also included 90 villages, what they called urban villages. Now, these urban villages have been very interesting items. Within the urban villages, the area of development was defined by what they called the Lal Dora. Within the Lal Dora, the development was controlled by the village panchayats. They decided or agreed with what was to be allowed to be built out there. And beyond that was the sort of so-called agrarian land or the agricultural land, which could not be touched. But even when this master plan was brought into place, it was recognized that the urban villages would still follow their own particular pattern and they would only, but yet all the surrounding areas, which were the farmland, was taken over for urban development. Now, within the villages itself, because it was uncontrolled and the master plan did not have a direct influence, it has been fascinating to watch how these villages have changed over time. And these are a very clear example. I mean, although the development and changes have occurred even in the master planned areas, it's in the villages that you see this very significant element. That is, one of them was the villages became the places where those kind of uses would go in for which the plan had not made provisions. And it is fascinating when you look back and see how the villages have changed. I mean, I have a village within a short distance from where I live in Panchsheel Park in Delhi, and you have a village called Shahpujat. But I've watched this village grow and change over time. At one time, for instance, in the early years, about 30 years, 35 years ago, the village was suddenly taken over by a whole lot of garment, uh, makers. Because garment, the making of garments was a big business at that time, and a lot of young people went into sort of developing garments. And the garment industry was an important one, but there was no provision for it in the plan. They didn't know where to go, so they went into the villages. They took over spaces that were left in the villages. They took over old houses, and they actually put the garment manufacturing units there. But what is interesting to see is that after some time, after a period of 15, 20 years, the garment industry died. The garment industry died, and we found a new set of changes coming in. I mean, today, for instance, I find in the same villages, you find there are, tutorial centers. Again, an item for which was not recognized. There are many villages surrounding IIT which have become sort of taken over completely by tutorial centers. 30 years ago, tutorial centers as such was not something that we even recognized as an item of discussion or something that you have to plan for. But there were so many new tutorial centers coming up within which there were young people who came from all parts of the country to undertake the courses so that they could participate in these examinations. But what is interesting is that these youngsters came and lived in these villages from about 6 months, 8 months at a time, because it was like not attending a full-time college course, but it was 6 months, 8 months, they would be there, and then they go back and a new set of youngsters would come in. But what is fascinating is that the entire village changed to meet this need. You know, the kind of eating places, the kind of walking places, the kind of bookshops and everything that came up, it catered directly to this need. Now, this is fascinating. The certain villages, for instance, you'd be surprised. I mean, like a village like uh, close to the Qutub Minar. The entire village, the central street, has been taken over by art galleries. Who would have thought art galleries are not something which is not a small thing. It's a sophisticated development, and yet you would think that could be planned for. But the point was that within the master plan, there were no specific spaces. Horsecast village was taken over years ago by a whole lot of people who set up art galleries and they set up, garment units and so on. And the whole thing became a lively place. And even today, some of the best eating places are in Horsecast village overlooking the Horsecast lake. But what I'm trying to put across to you is that even in all the planned areas, like for instance, again, I draw your attention to something like Nehru Place. Nehru Place was never planned as a shopping center. It was really developed as what was called a district center. And it was meant to be to provide for offices. And so the whole thing was built up. But in those days, people couldn't afford to buy large buildings and so on. So this entire development, although it was very carefully conceived, it was divided into small, small plots which were sold to individual developers. But what is very fascinating is to look back, and I'd like to mention this again, that is interesting. Nehru Place, in my opinion, even today, is one of the finest pieces of urban design in the country. But yet, if you go there and look at it, and you find the buildings are falling apart, I mean, it looks as if it's not properly maintained, and yet, in many senses, let me give you a simple example. It was conceived and designed so that two levels around that entire central space, which was reserved for a pedestrian area, two levels were meant to be for shopping. And these shopping areas were connected by a continuous shopping street. But when it was built, everything was built, all these shops were there, but no shopping came in. Because the thing was that in those days, I'm talking about the 70s, early 70s, and 75, 80. These shopping centers were so expensive, nobody could afford the shops, couldn't afford to go in there. And there was no shops came in. So gradually, most of these places were taken up, some by banks, some by offices, some by various other, uses, restaurants, but not shopping. But 10 years, 20 years down the line, suddenly things changed again. You got a new use like your cell phone. And today is this, you want to buy and choose a variety of cell phones, computers, and so on, equipment. It's the largest and the most sophisticated hardware market in the country. So there's two floors of, a level which was provided for shopping, gradually got converted into shops, back again into commercial use, and there's it's a very lively place. Then there was this open space. This open space was not being used, and it was in the evening, the whole place would become dead. But you go there now, what's happened? Because of so much residential development around the whole area, you go in the evening, the whole place is full of life. There's uh, what you call, you know, vendors have come in and they've taken over the thing. It's the informal sector. And in the evening, the whole place is full of people. They're just walking down that central space because there's no traffic. It's completely quiet, but yet there are all these vendors. So they walk around there, they take a look. There's a variety of things that are offered. In fact, this is another amazing thing that you would think that, as the population has grown, as things have changed, demands, even in terms of what is required in shopping, is completely different. We have a very, very large section of the population, as we all know, like even what Kirtee had mentioned in the beginning, that we have about almost 60% of our population that constitutes the lower income group. Now, those lower income groups also need to buy various things. For them, the shopping is done completely off the footpaths. They buy everything from the informal sector market. There are weekly markets which are held, and in the weekly market, you can buy almost everything that you want. A whole variety of stuff, but it's amazing how it's all put up. It's just one evening and one morning, the people come in there, they bring in the things in the boxes, and by the afternoon, the boxes are opened up, and you have a wonderful display of all kinds of items. And the people, the market is in operation in the evening, and by late evening, it's done, and it's closed down, and everything goes over. So what I'm saying is,
Mr.
this
Sabiki,
is the kind of thing.
in the interest of time, can I request you to wind up in a couple of minutes?
I'm not able to hear you.
I said, in the interest of time, can I request you to wind up in a couple of minutes?
I understand that. Now, I'd like to just say finally that what is required in terms of planning today, in my opinion, is a completely new approach, a whole new approach which is flexible, where you do not have strong single-use zoning, but a multiple overlapping of development. Not only that, you have to have a kind of development which is possible, which allows for change, which allows for flexibility, for things to happen gradually. Because I've seen that some of the most successful developments, and here I'd just like to just go back for 1 second to what I was talking about earlier. When I mentioned the Nehru Place example, I wanted to also mention that at the same time, when the shopping did not come up in Nehru Place, there was this low-income group housing development in Lajpat Nagar, which had small houses, which gradually became a shopping center because it was cheaper. Shops could afford to go in there, and the whole thing today is a huge market. I remember 30 years ago I was talking to somebody like Jagmohan, who was chief of the Delhi Development Authority, and saying, look, Lajpat Nagar market is a complete market. Why don't you declare it as a sort of commercial zone? He says, we can't do that. The master plan doesn't allow that. So this is what I'm trying to say, is that you have, on one hand, our whole approach to planning is so predetermined. This is not what is going to be in the future also. It's going to be constantly changing, and we need a new way to look at things where change and constant change, and even our system of planning itself has to change. Lastly, I just say that we have so many new facilities today which we are not using. We could have complete, aerial surveys which could map out the entire city in 3 dimensions. You could have urban simulation diagrams which could be used to sort of imagine what possibilities there are. But our architects, planners, developers, everybody, they're totally unaware of this. We still continue with a primitive system. With that, I leave you, gentlemen.
Thank you, Professor Sabiki. That was very interesting, and I think some of your points on flexibility in planning and the kind of rigidity we impose and how so much of the city has adapted to needs outside the planning paradigm are things we will return to in the discussion. I will ask Mr. Edgar Ribeiro to speak. Mr. Ribeiro qualified initially as an architect from the JJ School of Arts, Bombay, and then studied town and country planning at the University of Manchester in the UK. After working in the UK for some time, he joined the Town and Country Planning Organization of the Government of India in 1962, which was then restructured as a spatial plan formulation and advisory arm of the government. He superannuated from there in 1988, but has been, I think, even more active on a variety of fronts, advising from the Union Territory of Goa, Daman and Diu, and also a team in the Central Ministry to propose urban design guidelines for Delhi, and And there are actually too many things here to list out, but he's one of our most eminent planners. His last consultancy was for the Union Territory of Lakshadweep, and he is now living in Goa. And Mr. Ribeiro, we request you to share your thoughts.
Thank you, Prem. I'll just read out a few points which I've jotted down. I feel honored, but a wee bit nervous at sharing this platform with the eminent architects at today's forum, as my contribution in providing the built space and surrounds in our urban and rural environment has been rather limited. I will therefore restrict my views to my more comfortable hat of the negative hat of a spatial development planner, who with architecture as a basic discipline has participated since independence in the shaping and dissemination of two-dimensional spatial platforms or frameworks for facilitating architects, urban designers, and their teams for providing the three-dimensional built environment. At the outset, it needs being underlined that the Federal Republic of India, with the 7th largest land mass in the world, and arguably with the largest variety of flora and fauna, has also the most unfavorable land-man ratio among the 20 most populated nations. Land is therefore a scarce resource. Despite signs of a tapering rate of population growth towards a worrisome geriatric support level. In other words, planners have to plan more for geriatric support rather than for the young. Clearly, in this scenario, the intervention by mankind in the built environment has to be meaningfully regulated through laws, rules, and regulations, and which until recently was viewed as a top-down center state exercise for the people. However, with the 73rd Rural and 74th Urban Constitutional Amendment Act of 1992, a down-top local state center through the people has emerged. This has facilitated participatory sustainable development as the main objective in shaping the built environment by professionals in the new millennium. In retrospect, we are aware that in 1901, when we had 350 million people, but only 55 million were in towns, in a town versus village scenario. By 1951, when we had 550 million people, but 1/4 were in towns, in a village come town equation. By 2001, when we hit 1 billion, about 1/3 resided in urban centers in what emerged as an urban-rural interface. By 2051, with 1,700 million or 1.7 billion, nearly 800 or nearly half would be urban in a municipal village panchayat continuum. So we have had a transition from town, village, urban, rural, and now municipal panchayat. Accordingly, in the new millennium, the settlement hierarchy of which we are familiar, of village, central place village, of which many are census towns, small towns and medium towns, medium and large cities, metropolitan areas, and mega city agglomerations has been reformatted as a continuum of village panchayats of multiple or single village or census towns and municipalities with corporations or councils, all based on participatory governance. So this is the format in which we are all required to work. In the process, I don't know how many of us have realized a new down-top spatial jurisdictional map has emerged for developmental planning, comprising of electoral wards of municipalities and panchayats as settlements within sub-districts and districts within the state and union territories without any overlaps. Thus, this enables 3 levels of integrated planning. One, a very detailed local area plans for the wards of village panchayats and municipalities. Structure plans for the settlements comprising of panchayats and municipalities, all within a broad brush regional plan for the districts. Thus, we have gone a long way from land use planning per se to comprehensive development planning through transportation, basic services, and land use. And now environmental management plans soon emerging as ecological management plans. Spatial development planning, therefore, is required to indicate how land is to be used, and only that, but at the right place and at the right intensity through dovetailed broad brush regional plans, settlement structure plans, and detailed local area plans, and where participatory planning has to be at its heights. Such rolling plans are ideally with 20-year perspectives, upgraded every 5 years, and also on an as and where required basis, as in Delhi and elsewhere. For public understanding, each plan should comprise of a map and how land is to be used, a matrix of uses allowed in each land use zone, and a clear development control chart that specifies only few things: maximum FAR, minimum parking spots, maximum height, minimum plot coverage, and minimum setbacks, maximum plot coverage and minimum setbacks per plot. Importantly, building bylaws as based on health, fire, and building safety should be kept separate from this land use process. In other words, simplification, and as a very eminent judge once told me, if a citizen does not understand your plan, it's not a plan. How do you make the plan simple for him to understand? Now, this makes sense as the built environment occurs and where builders, where architects and thinkers like all of you all are, the bulk of the built environment occurs through the state list, which is mainly housing, urban and regional development planning, slum improvement, and local self-government. And now, latterly, urban agglomeration mass transit. Marginally and not and of important is the concurrent list on which environmental and heritage protection and conservation is also part of this. The bulk of the built environment emerges from these laws. We thus see in the rapid growth of human settlements from town versus village in 1901 to urban come rural interface by 1951 to now a municipal village panchayat continuum by 2001 forward. A new map of India has thus emerged, and I repeat, comprising of electoral wards that constitute the village panchayats and the municipalities, and within the districts as a region. This, I think, is what planners are required to provide so that you provide the right environment. I basically just concentrated on this. I will not take too much time, but I just thought that if this framework is made available, of course, as Ranjit has already stated, a lot of problems arise because this is not properly implemented. The fact is, the moment you make laws, the power equations emerge, and a lot of interventions take place, and a lot of changes emerge, and it is so. The whole exercise today, which is now available to us, is that that we need spatial plans for, if proper spatial plans are required. Now, we have to also understand that this constitutional amendment comprises of two schedules. Schedule 11, which is for rural India, it has 29 items which have mandatorily to be provided by the elected village panchayats. And Schedule 12, which is for urban, it has 18 items which have to be mandatorily provided by the municipalities. Dedicated funds are also to go through this channel. So this places a lot of importance on the ward plans. Unfortunately, not many of them are available. But if we have a scenario where the ward plans are properly shown, and the ward plans constitute the municipalities and the panchayats within regional areas, we get a lot of success stories. The laws also have undergone a transformation. From 1963, the Model Town and Country Planning Act, which laid down the guidelines for the laws of the states to be provided, was tweaked in 1975, and we had the Model Urban and Regional Development Planning Law. And now, based on this constitutional amendment, a new Model Sustainable Act was on the anvil, but it is all changed now. Basically, it is in this context, I am a little confused with the term cities, which we are discussing today. Cities, in the understanding of all decision makers, etc., is something between towns and metropolitan areas. But I think curbing the entire group of urban areas as cities, we should look into that a little carefully because, and I think this has been driven by the smart city exercise. The smart city exercise has been a little change because has led to a little change because from the planning commission where we were going from through the 12 five-year plans, we were coming to some sort of an equation of between the planners and the investment planners of the planning commission and the spatial planners coming on the same platform and going down top. Suddenly, the smart city exercise has led to a top-down interventions. And even the guidelines for the smart city, I have found out of the 100 smart cities included, they have curbed Lakshadweep's capital island of Kavaretti, they call it as a smart city. And the guidelines for developing a smart city is almost the same as for Delhi. This has come out recently in the confusion that's going on there. And just imagine telling the panchayats of Lakshadweep, look, you are a smart city, and that is why we are developing it for you in those ways. Another point I would also like to say, which is of interest to Kirtee and others, is about the policies. A lot of policies we insist be at the central level. Sometimes it is better that this is at the state level. Housing policy, for example, I have a feeling it's much better if it is a shelter policy, because I remember that as long back as 1974, Kirtee will be aware of that, John Turner came out with a statement, a slum. A slum is the start of a housing process. That changed the entire equation, and we changed the International Year of Shelter as not an International Year of Housing, but an International Year of Shelter, whereby shelter upgrading with people's participation is an important equation in urban growth, and not just providing housing, as which is happening now. The second is heritage, of which Gurmeet, I'm glad that she is going to concentrate a lot on this expertise of hers. The heritage has to be shown on development plans, but in a very limited way, only what the law allows. The law, it is the Archaeological Survey, the Central Archaeological Survey Act, which tells you to show what buildings are to be shown, preserved and protected, the 100 meters and 200 meters line, which is to be conserved, and a supporting state act, which shows you the same thing. And in addition, the urban and regional planning acts indicate to you which are the other buildings of natural and man-made heritage to be shown in those plans. Now, this is all that we can show, but they have to be shown on the plans. And there are very few plans that are showing it. Delhi has started doing it now, because these are the touch-me-nots. And if these are shown, the whole structure of development planning will improve. And I think I'll just leave these few thoughts and look at the questions being asked, and then we can all respond to them. But it is really, as we need the two-dimensional frameworks for experts to provide the three-dimensional growth in an organized way and through down-top participatory planning, bringing the people into the framework is there. Why it is not happening is what we can debate. And basically, it is the power which is with elected members is being lost, because largely these 29 items at the rural level and 18 items at the urban level was largely in the state list. So MLAs are losing their power, and the councillors and panchayats are not able to pick them. The panchayats are not able to pick them up. And I think this is where a lot of the problems arise. Thank you. I'll just end there.
Thank you, Mr. Ribeiro. I think in the discussion, we will need to return to questions by initiatives like this participatory planning through the 74th Amendment, or the idea of ecological management plans have been more sort of statements on paper, but are not necessarily reflected in reality on the ground. Our next speaker brings an important voice into the discussion, that of heritage conservation and management, because there's no doubt we have a rich heritage in cities, but we have not institutionalized a means by which we can adapt the principles of that heritage to contemporary needs and transit modes. So we have Gurmeet Rai, and she's amongst the first generation of conservation architects in India, has worked in the area of architectural conservation and preparation of management plans for World Heritage sites such as the Red Fort in New Delhi and Ellora Cave in Maharashtra. She's prepared urban conservation strategies for several development plans in the Kashmir Valley, anchored in the conservation of cultural and natural heritage sites and equitable development with communities at its core. So Gurmeet, over to you.
Thank you so much, Premji. I mean, I'm delighted to be on this platform because one is sharing this with one's professors and mentors. And there's so much that Professor Ribeiro has said, which I recall that one learned while in college. I'd like to share a brief presentation to be able to illustrate the points that I'd like to share this. So if that is okay.
You can go ahead and share your screen. That's been enabled.
Yeah, is my screen visible?
Yes, it is.
Okay, so what I'd like to share is a couple of case studies. I mean, I was involved as a Hriday City anchor appointed by the Ministry of Housing and Urban Affairs for the last 5 years. The project just got over last year. And this is for the historic cities or towns of the town of Puri and the city of Amritsar. And from the heritage perspective, I mean, I'm sure people are familiar with that Government of India, Ministry of Housing and Urban Affairs came out with the first program in the I think, history of independent India that the city interventions in a city were being considered very carefully based on the heritage significance. So 12 historic cities were identified and they all happened to be pilgrimage centers. Now, with Puri, what you see on the screen is the town. And here on the left side, what you see is the river Musa. And I'd like to draw your attention that the planning area is defined here. But even other than the planning area, the river, part of the river gets left out of the planning area. You also see that within the planning area that the river is truncated. This is all because of development in recent times. And so as a result, River Musa works as a sewerage, carries a lot of wastewater and so on. You see on the right is that if you, the story, when you map heritage of Puri, this particular region is called Shankashetra. And in the Shankashetra in the center, you see the Jagannath Temple. Now, Jagannath Temple is an ASI protected monument, protected in 1938 with its 100 meters and as prohibited zone and another 200 meters as regulated zone. What you see in red and orange around the temple are actually mathas. Now, I'll draw your attention to the mathas and jagaghars and the temples. So in terms of a diagnostic survey was undertaken of the settlement to understand that what is this fabric? And this is not something which is determined by a master plan or so on, because we were required to prepare a city Hriday plan, and we decided to understand what is this fabric that we are dealing with. This is what the master plan looks like. Now, right here is the Jagannath Temple, and to the other end of the Baradanda, which is where the Rath Yatra takes place, you have the Gundicha Temple. All the orange structures are the mutts. All these blue structures are the water bodies, and these are jagaghars. Jagaghars are places where, there are communities and they have a place to do pushti, and they're and this is a community, it reflects the community structure, because there'll be 50 people, 500 people who actually are members of these particular institutions, and they provided a line of defense around the Jagannath Temple. You also have the rest of the area, of course, the use, if you look at it, the entire seafront, the sea. Now, this is something which I'd like to draw your attention on, that you see all these blue dots are pokris, and pokris are water bodies, little talabs, which are used for recreational purposes by the local community. Now, the point I would like to draw your attention on is that when development is kind of considered in towns like this is not what is mapped and responded to. And, I would say, like, look, we are talking about when we decided to do this, when we were planning for this town, I actually reached out to the MLA, and I'd like to, kind of illustrate the point from what Professor Ribeiro was saying, that look, these jaga ghars are very, very important to be protected. They're very important to be desilted because several of these pokris are dry. And what is also important to see is that Puri, in spite of being on the edge of the sea, actually has sweet water. And because of which there are two little areas in the planning area of Puri, which are designated as sweet water zones. So what you see on the right side, this bland, dry area is actually the sweet water zone. And all that has been considered for this area is that it's got a boundary wall and you're not supposed to build on it. So because of the National Green Tribunal, they've been able to protect these areas because they need rainwater to percolate into the ground to recharge the sweet water. Now, with a truncated river, with overdrawing out of water because the density or the city is expanding very quickly, the water is getting depleted and the seawater is going back into these areas, and the drinking water is turning brackish. Now, jaga ghars become very important. These pokris become very important to restore because these catch rainwater to recharge the groundwater. Now, the reason why I'm kind of getting into the granularity of this point is that when you look at the planning documents and you look at what happens in the city, these are two ends of the spectrum. And, it's very, very interesting because I remember Professor Ribeiro used to tell us in college that we don't need more laws. There are enough laws that can enable sustainable planning or what you want to achieve. What you need to do is implement. But the point is, who's going to implement it with the right kind of view in mind? When Vivo had been created around this protected monument, now that is a prohibited zone, but under ASI's nose, this 30 meters was bulldozed and a corridor had been created. In the recent times, as recent as last year or the year,
Gurmeet, your voice is breaking. Hello, your voice is breaking. So perhaps
another 70 meters has been added.
Gurmeet?
Yes?
Your voice is breaking. Perhaps you can turn off your video while you're making your presentation. That might help the bandwidth.
Okay, I'll just do that. Stop. Yeah. Is it better now?
Yeah.
Okay. So this is what is being created around Jagannath Temple, which is this corridor, completely sanitized, and some sort of a plaza is what the architects have planned for this area in that 100-meter, and completely not disconnected from the social, cultural, structures of the settlement. And I'd also like to remind you that these mattas, they are connected to the temple not as just built fabric. There is, each of the mat, there were 300 mats. They were connected to the Jagannath Temple because they have a certain right of a certain seva or a seba. Somebody has a right to work in the kitchen, somebody has a right to offer tulsi, somebody has a right to offer flowers and so on. Now, the moment you get rid of the built fabric, which is connected with a social narrative of a community, you're actually completely disconnecting the community from its heritage, from its inheritance, and creating these very, very kind of, sanitized spaces, and all planned for tourists. The other case study where I quickly would share with you is that of the case of Amritsar. Now, Amritsar, you see in the center, is a bean-shaped walled city with the Golden Temple right in the center. Now, the city owes its creation or inception to the making of the Sarovar and the founding of the temple by the founding gurus, the Sikh gurus, Guru Ramdas, and then the fourth Sikh guru. This is a 19th century painting, which shows the tradition of making of the temple, which was the gurus there. There are people offering their labor. There are bricks being made through seva. There's a community kitchen. There's a complete labor of love, which is kind of in people invested in that shrine. Till the early part of the 20th century, till the 1920s, the temple sat seamlessly within the fabric of the city. There were no boundary walls. The edges of the temple is defined by the water body, and the entire city gravitates, in fact, around the activities of the temple. This image is a 19th century painting which shows the work culture, the ethic in the city. You see the temples, you see gurdwaras, you see all the crafts, the artisans, all of them, all around, what we call today as the cultural industries or the creative industries, and a whole economic base of the walled city. This is parallelly during the same time that the British mapped Amritsar. This is an 1870s map, and it has a complete different information, and which is how the railway line gets created. It disconnects the walled city, where the city of the natives, from the civil lines where the colonial part of the city was. And what you also see is a lot of other transformations that happen. The walls were broken down, the water bodies, some of them got filled up, the town hall got built. I mean, I don't want to get into the details of it, but I just want to draw the parallel between a 19th century painting of the culture of a walled city, a cultural expression of a walled city, and how the colonial period, they started, they created the Improvement Trust, they created the Municipal Corporation of Amritsar, and did a whole lot of changes to the walled city, all around so-called giving the place, people a better city to live in, but completely disconnecting the narrative of the people of the city from the fabric of the city. Today, if you look at the master plan of Amritsar, the old city is right in the center, and you have these circular ring roads around the city, reducing the walled city into a traffic island. And as the city is going to grow, slowly the traffic, the walled city is clearly going to function. The edges of the walled city is going to function as a rotary. This is how we plan. What you see is, okay, where the industry is going to be, where the defense is, where the residential area is, and what you see inside the walled city is Harmandir Sahib with some sort of, and the designation is some sort of a tourism area, and within the walled city, and that's how the plannings are. But if you were to look inside the walled city, we did a whole lot of study in terms of how does the city function, and we looked at the width of the roads. And what would happen, what would be the impact of that vehicular road, that called the circular road, on the edges of the walled city on the inside? What I would like to draw your attention on is that when you see Harmandir Sahib, what you see to the northeast of it is a tourism plan, a tourism intervention. A heritage street has been created. Now, heritage streets are created by architects like me and you and, people who are watching this webinar. And what are we doing? We are preparing, this is what is causing gentrification in our cities. Amritsar has become a case study for other walled cities to go and look at. That this is a very beautiful example to go and do things like this in cities. It is successful for certain reasons. but it is very unsuccessful for many other reasons, for the reasons that Kirtee Bhai was talking about today. This is what the heritage street looks like. I mean, the moment you change the fabric at the threshold of a sacred site, the body language of people change. The entire relationship between what this heritage street has done is that it has calmed the traffic on the immediate threshold of the temple, but it's got completely trivialized. There are, Subway and McDonald's and, all of that has come here. And today, I mean, I feel embarrassed when I see the use of word heritage used the way it is used. Here, Harmandir Sahib is not a protected monument, like the Jagannath Puri is. In the back lanes, you still have these artisans. Nothing is planned for them. They don't have a better quality of life or a better work environment or programs which would kind of increase their livelihood opportunities. We did make recommendations as part of our plan, which is that the walled city of Amritsar requires to become a non-motorized zone. We need to provide for parking on the periphery, which is on the circular road, and non-motorize it. There's a lot of lip service that is being given to non-motorized initiatives, but very little political will to implement such programs. We did make recommendations for even improved stormwater management, because water is central to the planning of historic Amritsar, but this is yet to see the light of day. So basically, historic cities of the past reveal an intrinsic relationship between community, cultural practices, natural resources, and the urban form. The current development paradigm, it is removed from cultural practices, alienating the community. There's a disconnect between cultural and natural resources, and we need to put in processes which are appropriate to make it inclusive. Central, what we are missing, though participatory planning is something which is being spoken about a lot, and we've been hearing about it forever, but understanding knowing the community, understanding their cultural and natural heritage, the memory of a place, their values, their practices, their vulnerabilities are very, very critical. So the human being needs to be central to the planning process. And this is something which I kind of in a recent webinar like this heard, and it kind of, the penny dropped for me. And that is that, there is this new urban agenda and the international platform. There are sustainable development goals that everybody is talking about, we must achieve. But I feel that there is something fundamentally wrong in our planning processes. That is that the human being is not central to the planning process. And when I, as a conservation practitioner or a heritage practitioner, talk about heritage, I am not interested in just brick and mortar of a building. Diagnostic survey, like what Patrick Geddes said 100 years ago. And that survey needs to be based, when we do this survey, what we need to first and foremost put central to our planning process is that a lot of wrongs have happened in the last 100 years. And that's what we are experiencing in our cities today. So reparation needs to be the new norm. Our planning guidelines need to somewhere be reworked. Human beings need to be central to the process. And restorative justice needs to be the fundamental principle for cities of today and tomorrow. There is, the moment we get, either there are a lot of statistics that are thrown at you, or there are a lot of laws that are thrown at you. Clearly, neither of the two have given us the cities that we would be proud of. One data that I would like to, I'll close with that figure, which is that when they did the participatory process in the smart city thing, 100 smart cities, 38 cities, the people of 38 cities out of those 100 cities actually said that we want our ABD, our area-based development, to be done in our historic cities, whether it is Amritsar or Jaipur or Srinagar and several other cities. People of the city said, we want all facility in our historic areas. And I mean, the smart city is structured around all for one and one for all. And the city of Amritsar said, we want improved transportation and communication as a pan city requirement. Srinagar also asked for that. So what I'm saying is that if people of the cities are saying we want our historic cities or our cities, we want brownfield projects, we want our older cities to become more livable, they clearly are not looking at, you know, demolition and rebuilding. They are looking for something more than that. And so thank you so much.
Thank you, Gurmeet. I think you've raised some very important points on how we have misplaced priorities. We have a monument-centric approach to heritage rather than a precinct-centric approach, and we tend to look at heritage more from the viewpoint of tourism than as from the viewpoint of lived life. Our next speaker is Mr. Raj Rewal, who is one of the most eminent architects of India, who's long set global precedents with his narratives of design, trying to juxtapose traditional concepts into a modern vocabulary. He was educated in Delhi and London, worked in Paris before initiating his practice in New Delhi in the 60s. And in a career spanning over 5 decades, he's produced some of the landmarks of Indian modern architecture. He, with Ram Sharma, founded the Architectural Research Cell for carrying out the works of the Festival of India, Paris in 1986, and co-curated the exhibition. He was the responsible commissioner on traditional Indian architecture, involving a portfolio of measured drawings of Fatehpur Sikri, Jaisalmer, Datia, Orcha, Stepwells, Jantar Mantar, etc. And the drawings were prepared in his office. He has taught at School of Planning and Architecture in New Delhi and has also lectured at universities across the world. Mr. Rewal, please do share your thoughts.
Okay. I think we all know about the problems of our cities. We are living in a very awkward time. On one stage, we have the most polluted cities of the world at this stage in India. We have tremendous traffic problems. Cities like Bombay, Calcutta, Delhi, Madras. We share these things with Istanbul, Lahore. Almost all Asian cities are submerged with these tremendous problems. And a lot of these problems are because we are now almost an upper middle class society. The motor cars have taken over our cities like almost in terms of our own lifetime. Where I live in South Delhi, when I first built the house, there used to be 2 cars in front of our house in, let's say, half an hour. It's main ring road. And now, my God, I mean, it's something like 50 cars in 2 minutes. So that's what's on one side. So it's the pollution, it's traffic jams, we know all about. But there is another part of this, and I like to concentrate a bit on it. And that is, at the same time, in the last 2 decades, we have seen the emergence of institutes of technologies, complexes for research and education and other building types on a gigantic scale. It's really gigantic scale. Nowhere in the world, maybe only in China, you see that. We are building on an epic scale. I use the word epic scale. This is between architecture and urbanism. Buildings which starts maybe as architecture and expand into urbanism, or they're not conceived as urban conglomerations in the beginning, but as architecture on a vast scale. I think that is our tradition. And I think I like to show to Ribeiro has talked a little bit about local area plans and 3-dimensional buildings. But I think the city's problem Ranjit has talked about, but I like to go into something like vast universities which are being done, educational buildings, institutes of technology. So I like to show some of that work to complement, because everybody is looking at these things from all over the world, that there is a positive side to all that. And I think it's very important that we take over the positive side of our living conditions, and somehow we try to solve that. Now, I like to show a university, but before that, we show something which has been my inspiration, which I think all of you may have read about, or I just show very quick images. Okay, so because you see, I mean, we have vast temple towns. I think nowhere else in the world, maybe, where the cities are merged with temples in such a integrated manner. We have cities like Fatehpur Sikri, Jaisalmer, which as has been explained, help to measure and to pay drawing, create a narrative for modern Indian architecture. And I have, so to speak, tried to find a solution that what can be very, at the same time, very modern and at the same time, very Indian. And I think I'd like to just show two quick projects. It's a university in Rohtak, which had a very interesting program of creative arts, let's say an institute of film, architecture, urbanism. I'm just showing some images from, let's say, this is Oxford, before that was Bologna, but this is the university I'd like to talk about. This is built in Rohtak, and the program comprised of, as I said, fine arts, film institute, architecture, urbanism, and film institute. So the four institutes are built together. When the program was given to me, I asked the person involved, I said, where did you get this program? There's nowhere else in the world there is a film institute as big as you are proposing. And he said, you know, I went to the internet and whatever was the best everywhere, I put together as a program for you to build on. So let's say here is a design institute. There is a fine arts institute, architecture, urbanism, and film institute. So let's say this is on a scale almost half the scale or 3/4 of the scale of what is Fatehpur Sikri. Now I go into the program, let's say, the idea was how to create very diverse kind of building, but which are also unified, which has been, I think, a character, or as I use the word rasa, of our great cities in the past, something which is totally missing now. And I think which can be only created if we have a sort of vast scale to work on. And I'll get back to the city planning or our cities, because this is a segment of a city in a way, which we can design. I can show housing projects later on, but that will take a lot of time. So I just stick to this university. So what I tried to create was that let's say that there is a unification with the material and the kind of spaces which flow into each other to create a really an urban environment. I mean, the students are not only sitting in the classroom, but they can sit in a central foyer among the flowers. There are sunken gardens for seminars. Let's say the images from Shanti Niketan that you can sit around a tree and learn, or have, so the essentials of microclimate, urban design, architecture, but at the same time, these buildings are very built with materials. I mean, I go into the plan, as you can see, the different institutes. I mean, the scale is really very large, and a central institute, which is to be used by all of them together, which has an auditorium of 300 persons, a library, meeting rooms, etc., open air theaters. So I think it's that kind of potential also exists in our city. This is during the construction stage. you can see the scale of it in a way, and how we have to tackle these things at the same time as we are dealing with other problems. Next. Now, this is the kind of, let's say, the spaces within the building where students can sit around and learn, sunken gardens. And also, this is a building based very much on the ideas of microclimate, or based on courtyard, which all of you may have worked on. But in this project, I try to also use that 15 to 25% of the energy use is by photovoltaic panels. And I was very much inspired by, let's say, I think some of you may have seen or heard about the city in Iran, Yazd, which I saw many, many years ago. And these are the wind towers in a way, but also capped by photovoltaic panels. And in this case, the strategy was that we use not the batteries, which are very expensive, difficult to work, but directly connected to the electrical generation plants, etc. So I'm just showing very quick images that this is a potential. Now, landscaping is still at an early stage, but we almost did everything within our own office at this stage, in some respects. Next one. Now, I'm just showing the details also, because as an architect working on an urban scale, one of the major programs, as I said, is how to harmonize, but at the same time to have very diverse diversity in the building types. And I try to learn that from our historic monuments. Now, these are the sections you can see based on courtyards and this unifying building with an auditorium, meeting rooms and lectures, etc., open air, amphitheater. Now, these are all quite different buildings to each other. I mean, this is an attitude very different from what's being done in the universities, let's say in America or elsewhere, even different from China, where I have worked, where they give different buildings to different architects. I think that's very important on a vast scale, but at a certain scale, when the architect is one, he has to devise ways and means that there is a certain kind of unity in a certain kind of very diverse kind of building. I mean, you can see the character of the inside, outside, but carried out on a vast scale. You can see the foyers of the Design Institute. This is the foyer of the Design Institute with the light, etc. Now, I think we had given space in India to both Corbusier and Kahn to do their major works, but I think this is the time we did these buildings ourselves. I'm just showing the light in Corbusier's building in Chandigarh, which influenced me very much to see the kind of light and sort of detailing which can really make the buildings office level, let's say, to the highest, at least aim to the highest possible potential. This is the art school and auditorium jutting into it. You can see, just show this thing. Now, this is very much, let's say, in a way inspired by, you might say, symbolic values from India's heritage. They have talked about the chakras of various types, but I was very conscious that it's also a very structural element, wheel, and with photo designed to have all the photovoltaic panels, and this stake is going around, has maybe going up because there were big meeting rooms, etc. So escape staircase. So I designed them almost at a monumental scale. You can see the interior of the library. Okay, I think after that, I'd like to show one more thing. I think Gurmeet is working in Amritsar. I don't know if she seen it on the road. You see, I was asked if I can get into doing a large memorial complex, which would be also a library, an institute in Jalandhar, near to Jalandhar. And it's a sort of a memorial complex, but at the same time, it's very much building of our times, what I've tried to do, reinterpret certain values. Next. I was very much inspired by, I'm saying, Sanchi Stupa, Humayun Tomb, Taj Mahal, what's being done, the Amritsar, the Golden Temple, etc. Also, the Pantheon in Rome, because it's a martyrs memorial, an independent memorial. Also, Punjab's very local culture of dance and music, something very dynamic character. What should I build? And I think I came about this design. I mean, I had to project it in a very short time, what I should do. So these are the, actually, it's a museum, memorial, exhibition spaces, library, and all in one combined, very large thing. Also built in, for the first time, my client, Mr. Badal, was the Chief Minister of Punjab, and he told me in Punjabi, I think some of you may understand, कि मैंने तो marble ज़रूर चाहिए. I want to have something in marble, and I explained to him marble is really not a very modern material, but he said you can use it. But another thing which inspired, let's say, is very important. This structure, you can see the jack. I'm aiming at. I was from Fulkari. I tried to reinterpret sort of flowers as the structural system, which is also very logical in its own way, because a lot of my earlier work, which you may know, has an expression as a structure. So I tried to find another way to it. I mean, the scale is, this is about 150 feet, 150 feet wide on 3 levels of memorial. So let's say I came up with this design. The entrance, almost like temple structure, that's a gopuram, which I think also the Mughal memorials have it, entrance, but it's vast space within it. There is the libraries, if I begin to explain it, and a minaret. I had a lot of problem doing a minaret. I explained to Mr. Badal, minaret is never done in modern architecture. It's a symbol of phallic thing in Western architecture. But he explained to me, okay, no, in our culture, minaret, like Qutub Minar, is a symbol of victory. So all these people who gave their lives wanted to achieve independence, and this would be the symbol of it. Next.
Mr. Rewal, in the interest of time, can I request you to wind up?
I will go very fast. Okay, because I think you'll be not talking about cities. These are city level plans. Come on, very quickly. You can see the actual thing. As you can see, a lot of images within the buildings, in the sections. This is the memorial part. This is the basic sequence of spaces which go around, entrance, and the vast cinemas, auditoriums, all built into one. This is the entrance hall. This is the interior of the entrance. As you see enter, you see also the memorial hall, let's say very much inspired by what happens in Mughal buildings or even the temples. The entrance leads to something else. Next. You can see the form of the buildings. I tried to capture the dynamism of a certain period in Punjab. This is the interior of the minaret. The birds symbolize the life people gave. And this is, I think I'll stop with this one. This is, I think we have finally to create very modern architecture, which may have linked with our past, and also to be able to do it on a very gigantic scale. And this is still, as I said, I think our generation has that potential, and the younger architects, urban designers. So the idea of working on an epic scale still exists for us. So with that, I would say thank you very much. And I would have liked to talk about low-cost housing, which I have done, slum things in Bombay areas, but that will take a very long time because a lot of my earlier work was on housing and Navi Bombay, and with Charles Korea nudging me to do that. He said in Bombay, we don't do housing very well. So in North India, all you and your friends, Ranjit and Raj and everybody else is doing much better housing. So I want you to do a housing. So I'm not going to show it, but there are books and all that. Many of the people who are seeing it from outside can see not only we are doing monumental, but also working at scale, which is very different. So with that, I'd like to thank you. It's another facet of urban design, epic scale, what can be done within our cities. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Rewal. Our last speaker is Mr. T Krishnan, who heads an architectural consultancy firm in Chennai, which is one of the prominent firms of Chennai, but is also nationally known. Does work developing master plans, architectural and engineering designs for major industrial developments, educational campuses, and residential projects. He's also been involved with heritage conservation, has been the state convener of INTAC, the Indian National Trust for Architectural and Conservation Heritage, and has directed restoration projects, the Madras University Senate Hall, conducted many important conservation studies, and has published a book, Madras, the Architectural Heritage, which is on the heritage of Chennai. He's also the member of many government committees on planning and heritage. Mr. Krishnan.
Thank you, Prem, for your introduction, and thank you all for the opportunity to be part of this forum to discuss this complex topic. And I'll be reading out from this small note which I prepared for this discussion. I hope you don't mind that. I would like to discuss this in the context of Chennai because that's the city I'm most familiar with. And I hope that we'll be able to find parallels in problems faced by other cities in this country. Now, diversity is the defining character of our nation, and our cities are a true reflection of this. The resulting variety should make our cities exciting places to live in, but sadly, they have slipped below the thin line that separates variety from chaos. Charles Korea once said that variety has character, but chaos looks pretty much the same everywhere. This is true of all of our cities where growth and rebuilding have left them with very little to be differentiated from each other. Our inability to manage this diversity has resulted in a conflict-ridden and stressful environment that detracts from the quality of life in urban centers. In this conversation, I would like to take a look at our planning process without getting into the political and governance issues, which could be a topic for further discussion elsewhere. And in the process, try to understand our missteps and what could be done about them. See, the first master plan for Chennai was drawn up in 1975. That's about 45 years ago, when the city was just beginning to grow. Since then, it has been revised several times, and a second master plan came into force a few years ago. So many years of continued planning efforts have not saved the city from the ills we face today. Many parts of the city are environmentally unstable and not ready to face the future challenge of climate change. There is a severe shortage of affordable housing. Obsolescence and decay haunt many parts of the city which were once traditional villages subsumed by urban growth. Urban sprawl is consuming green areas and prime agricultural land, converting producers into consumers, and the list can go on and on. So why are the plans unable to address these issues? First and foremost is that the master plans are a top-down exercise drawn up by World Bank approved consultants, mainly addressing economic factors and growth strategies. They finally end up identifying a wish list of mega projects to boost urban development, which is greatly liked by governments and funding agencies alike for the hype that surrounds them. The ongoing plans are based on the assumption that privatization and technology will solve problems of delivery. In its present form, it devalues traditional government and in the process loses access to the wealth of knowledge and operational information available in their repositories. It was the same attitude of deregulation that brought about the global economic meltdown of 2010. We cannot expect businesses with single point agendas of maximizing profit to behave in fairness to all. And technology, except in electronics, has never really reduced costs. Examples of this are like you take the Chennai Metro Rail and the Madras Rapid Transit System. They have done considerable damage to the city environmentally. While the MRTS, that is the Rapid Transit System, was responsible for flooding in large sections of the city, the Metro Rail has destroyed parks and open spaces and heritage buildings in a city that is already starved of these. These so-called development strategies are anything but equitable. They support a policy of commodification of land, where land values and real estate development potential are the main drivers in decision-making. Because of this, there will never be enough land available for affordable housing where it is needed. And community and social infrastructure will not get the priority they deserve through privatization. Conservation of the historic fabric of the city and heritage sites are at risk because of artificially high land values. Now, this is the ground situation that we are facing today in our cities. Environmental conservation involving riverine and coastal ecosystems end up as unsustainable beautification projects. In other words, the plans do not connect with the people or their value systems because they are influenced by external factors. This disconnect can also be attributed to a dysfunctional planning process. I think we have all been talking about this aspect. Having dealt with macro issues the master plan for Chennai abruptly moves to a single set of building rules and land use regulations. A single set of building rules and land use regulations. I repeat that, for the whole city at the micro level without establishing any rationale for the same. In the process, it skips the drawing up of detailed development plans for the various zones that make up the city. What we have, therefore, is an easy to administer set of building rules that paints the whole city with one brush. It fails to recognize the unique character of various neighborhoods that make up the city. This one-size-fits-all approach has already led to a loss of diversity, the very thing that we are trying to preserve. When we overlook the detailed development stage in any city planning exercise, we lose the very important urban design component, which is the glue holding the different parts together in the planning process. Through this, people can find expression and the ability to influence their physical environment when it is accompanied by community participation at the local level.
It is the process by which local needs can negotiate a space for itself in the master plan. Building regulations should therefore be the outcome of this urban design exercise and not a top-down master plan diktat. Further, being embedded in the master plan, there is neighborhood plans being embedded in the master plan, will greatly enhance funding possibilities for neighborhood projects which currently languish in neglect. Our cities look like a collection of discrete elements that have no relationship with one another. There are firewalls between public and private domains. They are like heaps of sand where the particles do not interact with one another, unlike in living cells that through a process of accretion evolve to the next level of existence. The city is supposed to be like a living organism, constantly evolving by exchanging ideas, resources, and experiences. This sharing can happen through well-planned transitions between the private and public realms like streets, market, transit stations, etc., that will bring people together and not drive them indoors. These issues can only be addressed if urban design is an integral part of the planning process. Now, streets are the face of the city. It is the medium through which the city expresses its culture. But in this country, it is the most neglected space. It has become what is known in planning terms as SLOP, S-L-O-P. That is, spaces left over in planning. It is not, the streets are not owned by anyone, but several agencies have rights over it that often conflict with each other. The diversity of our culture is being played out on the streets in unsafe and conflicting conditions. Now, master plans will not or cannot address this. But if you bring planning down to the local levels, then the street will stop being a space left over. Having said that, we can recover what is left of our cities and maybe even reverse the process of alienation if the planning processes can be made a bottom-up process starting from the local neighborhood. Planning should also become a genuinely participatory process where all stakeholders must have a say. In a nutshell, reimagining our planning processes will require that, one, government should ensure that policies are shielded from the overarching influence of funding agencies who are only enablers, but in practice, they seem to be dictating things down to what the city should be doing and what government should be doing. The master plan should only be a policy document dealing with land policies, economy, growth, etc. The physical planning concept, the physical planning component should be removed from its scope and be decentralized. The city should be divided into entities based on socio-cultural, environmental, or any other suitable attributes, and such entities should be endowed with the ability to draw up detailed development plan that could then become the master plan. What I'm saying is that the physical plan should be generated from below, from the local level, and finally get embedded in the main master plan, so that these neighborhood improvements can also access the funding and the benefits of being in a master plan and not be left out of it. Lastly, building regulations should be area specific. That is, this idea of painting the whole place with one brush is only an administrative plan. It is not a planning exercise as we understand it. And in Tamil Nadu, it has become so bad that now they have a standardized building rule for the whole state. So this is the kind of thing that administrators are doing to planning. And we are not addressing this problem. We are not talking around it. I think we need to understand that planning and administration are two different things. And this is why we see everything is there on paper, like Mr. Ribeiro said, it's wonderful. But where is it going and disappearing? You know, our authorities are called authorities, that is planning authorities, development authorities, And they have come to an understanding that when they are an authority, what they need to do is to draw rules and regulations and give approvals. That is all that is being done by the planning authorities, as we understand it in Chennai. So this idea of being an authority must disappear, and we must have planning offices that will help neighborhoods develop their plans and embed it in the master plan according to the overall thrust of the master plan. In this manner, if we are able to change the process, we make it into a bottom-up process in practice, not on paper, with community development, with community participation. If we can make it, if we can change the process to a bottom-up process, we can expect a different outcome. If we cannot do this, then we can only expect more of the same. In other words, more old wine in new bottle. Thank you. I'm through.
Thank you, Mr. Krishnan. So now we'll come to the discussion, and there are a lot of interesting points that have been raised. And I think one thread that has come across many of the presentations is that we have our planning paradigms, and then we have life on the ground, how cities function. And there seems to be a huge gap between them. And given that we need such radical change and so quickly, I think that raises the question of whether that change will come from a popular movement that people need to mobilize on, or can we just hope that the so-called planning authorities and other agencies of state will become more enlightened. So I think to start the discussion, Kirtee Shah had some questions that he wanted to ask to launch the discussion. So over to you, Kirtee.
Prem, I'm personally very keen. I have a lot of questions. My small little kind of concern is this is 7:20. And we have officially 10 minutes left, and we could probably go to another 10 more minutes. And therefore, what I suggest is this, that before I come up with a question, I'm an insider. If there are important questions that has come from participant we have, I suggest let us handle them first. And then if there is time available, I would like to kind of come back and ask those questions. They're very important one, but they're premeditated in many ways because I was thinking about designing this particular discussion. And therefore, can we take up some key questions that have come from people?
Sure.
And then if there is a time available, I also suggest if everyone agrees, we may extend time by about 10, 15 minutes so that we could handle it.
I now take up one point Mr. Krishnan has been saying, and Ribeiro just left at the end of it. Am I understood? This is about three-dimensional local area plans. Because when I was the chairman of Delhi Urban Arts Commission, I suddenly realized that the planning process, which had been formulated, had nothing to do with the ground realities. The ground realities, as Ranjit had already pointed out, especially in Delhi, were very different. And I think the idea, I'll just stop at that, and I think Mr. Krishnan has also spoken about it, that the local area plans, three-dimensional designs, I would suggest, and I was going to say that in the Delhi Urban Art Commission, that for every 5 lakh person areas, there should be an architectural group which lives there, maybe.
You put the light on.
An architectural group of planners, urban designers will live in an area with around, let's say, 5 lakh people. There must be segments or clusters, and they can be involved into the local area plans because they live there. And I think my experience with the community, etc., is there are some community members which may be valid, but on the whole, I think it should be very much left in the hand of urban designers and architects. That's it.
So that brings us to a very key question that one person has asked, which is we realize that local plans are the answer, but at the local area, they perhaps might not have the required level of expertise. And how do we build expertise at the local level? What should be the way out there? Yeah, Mr. Ribeiro, you're muted.
Well, let us be clear. I agree with Mr. Krishnan that planners are concentrating on development control, which is very armchair, very power conscious, and not going down to the ground and doing plans, which is their main mandate. Today, geography is very important for the local area plan. Is that mandate the town planning scheme? Clearly, no. That mandate today is the electoral ward. Let's all be clear about it. The electoral ward, which has got an elected member at the municipal level or elected pancha at the regional level. And why do I say that? Because the Constitution has said so, because finances are supposed to go to him through the finance commissions. They're not going to the village. They're not going to the town. They're supposed to go to him. He has to handle 29 items at the rural level and 18. That is very clear. The geographic area is very important. You have at the helm an elected member, which never happened before after this. And that member is not the boss. He is accountable. He is accountable to the people. So he has to prepare a plan. Your question is, do you have the expertise for them to prepare the plan? No. He can have anyone to prepare the plan. The plan has to say, this is how land is to be used and at what intensity and what are the uses allowed or disallowed in that area. It is a very detailed plan where people can participate. Remember, because wherever we have tried it, it has been a success. It has happened in Kerala for some cases. That is very important. What is a local area plan is with a is
So to do this, do you suggest that we need to break the monopoly that the government holds on planning? That if you have local area plans?
Of course. Why is the government holding a monopoly on the planning? Because it is power. And that power is more at the state level. In a small state like where I live, it's all the way. All the power of the MLA has been lost because those 29 items, 18 items he was controlling. Today he has to share it and he has to share it on the basis of accountability. How those finances are to be, he's trying to slot the local bodies into a hierarchy of center-state relationship.
So, but
this
is
not
the problem. I'm sorry to butt in. This is the problem. This is the problem, what you're saying. The local areas and the elected members are all politicians.
Sorry.
They have a vested interest in all this. And let's say lawyers, and let me speak about it because I have very strong views on it and I've suffered when the Delhi Urban Art Commission. Every time there was a municipal commissioner who said they are architecturally illiterate, they are Philistines. I'm not using strong words like corruption, etc.
Yes.
By the way, what is needed is that by you change your laws so architects and planners come into the top position to be able to work on. I have seen a minister of works calling the head of the town planning authority and DDA, treating him like a chaplasi. I think this is the problem in the country.
Yes, because let me be very clear about this. You're right in what you're saying, because everyone is conniving to make sure the local area plans are not being made available. Because if the local area plans are not being available, you will move it on the basis of files, but local area plans will allow you to move it on the basis of plans. Plans can't be destroyed as easily as files. And wherever you have tried it and whenever you have done it, and there are people can oppose to something not being done. That local area plan will, for example, show, like what Gurmeet is doing, what can be imposed on it as a protected area or a heritage area to be passed on to someone else. You can do all these little things, or what are the coastal regulation zones and what are the protected forests, etc. These are the touch-me-nots around which development takes place. And if there is someone is violating that development, you have the resources of objections and suggestions will never be a preemptory one through the town planning board. This is all manipulated. And the only way you can do it is that way. That is your only hope. If not, you will continue cribbing.
Of course,
and let's not crib, and this is the time to go ahead and do it. Because I'm speaking from experience. Where it has tried, it has succeeded. If you don't want to try it by saying everyone is corrupt, they're this thing, of course they're corrupt. Of course the planners don't want to handle it. Get them to handle it this way. You try preparing local, each one of you will adopt a local area plan this way and see how it will work. I will give you a challenge and you can see how it works.
Yeah, of course, the elephant in the room, there's a link between the urban land and political fundraising, but I think that warrants a whole discussion in itself. And perhaps what the public needs to start acting on is more radical transparency in the planning process. Perhaps the Right to Information Act and means like that have to be directed at the planning process in a more concerted way in a popular movement. But another question, and this question is coming in various forms from many people. There's an echo across multiple people's questions, which is the issue of ecology, and how do we bring ecology into the planning process? And we saw it in a bit of Gurmeet's work when she talked about stormwater management and the work in Puri and how that was essential to preserving heritage. So should we look at ecology also as a form of heritage?
Yes, definitely.
Something, if I may.
Sure.
I'll
come to you, Gurmeet, but Professor Sabiki?
Yes. It is very interesting to see that Raj and Edgar introduced this whole issue of politics. And planning today has become a matter of politics. But more than that, I think what we have to realize, and which is I'd just like to mention this as a very serious issue. We as a profession of planners, urban designers, and architects have all been totally sidelined.
Exactly.
We just talk a lot. Raj, you are very lucky that you've managed to get a few large-scale projects, and those institutions are good for you to do. But when it comes to sort of city planning, it's a different issue. And that issue, I'm afraid, nobody is interested in, any architects, any planners, anybody. The whole process, look at what's happening in with the organization. CPWG is taking over the whole thing. They can do everything. They can do the plan, they can get a sanction, they can get the urban design approved, everything. What have we been reduced to? And we don't like to talk about it, but it is a sad situation that as a profession, we have been totally sidelined. Those of us who are lucky to have had our time, we've done things, but for the younger generation, I see they just sort of become people who are advertising products. They're not really interested in design or anything. It's a real unfortunate kind of framework that we have created for ourselves.
Thank you.
Finally,
that raises
I would
the
like
question.
to also say that, Edgar is very well talking about planning and all that and introducing it at a lower level and local level and having it participatory. Great. But the point is the politicians are going to do ultimately whatever they want to do. And we have created this situation. We are responsible for it, but we don't like to talk about it.
Perhaps architects also have to, the profession has to also start getting political in the way, not in the traditional sense of the word politics, but in the way we are driving the message of what is important in cities. We have to look at what strategies we use to publicize those. I'll turn to this question of ecology now and request Gurmeet to come in on that. Should we look at ecology as a form of heritage?
Absolutely. In fact, there are lots of, little details that are popping up in my head at this point. Across the board, if you were to look from the international to the domestic, to my experience on the ground, the international reference that I'd like to make is that the way UNESCO functions, with the two bodies that advises it. One is ICOMOS, which advises on cultural heritage, and the other is IUCN, which advises on nature. And it is only in the last few years that there is a very important program, which is the connection between nature and culture worked on on the international platform, and they call it nature culture connecting practices. And that's where ecology and cultural heritage are being looked at together. And there's a lot of effort between UCN and ICOMOS to work together on this particular paradigm. The second part, which is they're working on, is water as heritage. And the third part that is the new area of work is rights-based approaches in heritage management. So people, nature, culture is the platform, the principles on which we work. But I see it through my experience, because what I pick things up, these, pearls of wisdom from the international platform, and try to experiment that at the local level, because I'm a hands-on person. I see this at two levels. One is when I see a town like Puri, or if I look at the city of Srinagar, where I happen to work a bit, protecting natural heritage, whether it's the Dal Lake, or whether it's a river Jhelum, or whether it's the Musa River, or the Sweetwater Zone in Puri, or the Sarovars and groundwater in Amritsar. This clearly needs to be protected as heritage. And in fact, one of the most creative laws that I've seen for heritage is what Jammu and Kashmir enacted in 2010. And I think Mr. Sham Chenani was central to that, is where they have actually, it's a protection act for conservation, where natural heritage can also be notified, and so can cultural heritage. So avenues of trees, water bodies, all of these can be protected under this act. And through that, they create an authority. They are required to create an authority and work in a very integrated manner with planning bodies. But it's been 10 years, they have still not put in place a national, the state level authority to implement that act. And that's the sad part, I've been in this practice for almost 3 decades now. And I see that, in fact, my first few years of working, I saw much more experimentation in the space. But in the last 10 years, I see so much sluggishness in the system. While there are a little bit of experimentation that's happening with Hriday or some of these, but there's so much inertia at state level, at local government level. The second point that I'd like to make is the relationship between rural, hinterland, and cities. Statistics are thrown at you that in the year so and so, 70% of India's population will be living in cities. The point is, why will they be living in cities? What are we not doing at the rural level that people will be moving to cities? And the urban sprawl, the way we're gulping land, the way we are depleting the rural hinterland, what comes to my mind as a time-tested or as a very, very potent idea is what Sir Patrick Geddes said, is about that valley section. That unless as planners, we see the relationship between the rural hinterland and the city, we are going to have a very, very unsustainable model if you try to fix the city at the city level. I worked in a village called Kishankot in Gurdaspur district. In fact, I'd like to flag with you that in Punjab, the urban poor are poorer than rural poor as compared to the rest of India. And the area that I'm talking about Amritsar and Gurdaspur, it's got the highest urban poverty in Punjab. The poorest urban poor are actually in Punjab on the borders, on the international border. Now, when I was working in that little village, the relationship of that village with the town was that little children were going to towns to get pornography films. That is the relationship. and how sick that poor village was in terms of human development indicators. So when I look at green revolution and I look at the development paradigm from infrastructure that got created like canals and so on, which in 100 years ago, our villages were the rich areas. Cities were areas where there was the place where there was transaction, there was trade. That's where the pilgrimage cities kind of grew. But today we are focusing on the cities and our rural hinterland getting more and more depleted. So my point is that as planners, if we are looking at heritage, at ecology, we must look at the rural-urban linkages as well. So thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Krishnan, you have raised your hand.
Yeah, Prem, I would like to say one thing, instead of going outside this framework of planning, even given within this framework of planning as we understand it today, it's not difficult to bring in ecology at all. Because if we do our land use planning in a diligent and correct manner, it should automatically bring in the ecology aspect. What happens in our land use plans is that it is most often a regurgitation of what is already existing and how to expand the existing land use plan or how to modify it. There are contradictory uses. There are uses which are not in keeping with the environmental aspect. Now, a land use plan must be drawn up on the basis of ecological inputs and geographical and environmental inputs, and modifications should be made to what has already happened. For example, now if you look at the master plan for Chennai, it is just a repeat of what is existing. It's a survey of existing land use. I mean, this is not right. And how this land use also works is a very political situation, because suddenly one small plot inside the land use becomes something else because of there's a process of modifying the land use. Now all these practices must stop, and the land and the geography should dictate the land use, not what people have done on that land. If it is done in a genuine fashion and an honest fashion, the land use should automatically incorporate ecology and environmental issues. But unfortunately, this is not what planners are doing.
Thank you. Absolutely. And since Patrick Geddes was mentioned, it's unfortunate that this figure who's known as the father of modern urban planning devoted a decade of his life to India, and Indian urban planning is largely ignored today. And his idea of the diagnostic surveys of nature, of culture, and of physical form, and then what he called conservative surgery. So it's like the human body, you believe it has its life and you intervene only where necessary. One wishes that Geddes had the sort of his legacy had the impact, and unfortunately we've chosen to go by the precedent of Chandigarh and the fact that we can look at the city almost like a blank canvas and draw what we like on it. So yes, I think I'm afraid we are running out of time. Kirtee, do we need to wind up soon?
Yes. And I think before we do that, I think give me a minute to ask a question.
So I'll hand that over to you, and if I can
don't hand me over. Just listen to this one question that I'm asking,
sure,
which I had not asked. That is this. You see, when we were planning this particular session, thank you very much for everyone being here. Overarching, and I think thought that I had in my mind was this: that these are the people who essentially have been very important influence, on our cities in the last 30, 40 years. Now, I wanted to remind all of them, and I don't know how many remember it, but there's a very interesting seminar in Ahmedabad at NID. It's called Design for Development. And the keynote speech at that point of time was delivered by Ramesh Thapar, an early sort of public intellectual we have had. And he made a very interesting observation. He said our cities are being invaded by vulgarity is invading our cities. And he said that the problem that a sensitive designer faces is this, or a sensitive architect, whether he builds one good building among 99 buildings? Or does he invest his energy and time in sensitizing a society which doesn't produce those 99 buildings? Now, the vulgarity I was talking about in the context of built environment, was talking about pollution, talking about in the social environment, he probably talking about anesthetic, manner in which cities were going. The question that I have for all people who are in this particular meeting essentially are this: that did they share this concern with Ramesh Thapa? If they did, what was their response? See if they responded, what really happened? And my last question to them is, did they succeed in any form? Because one of the underlying theme around which we built this entire 50 webinar series is this, that we have a problem with the way we are dealing with our cities. Our cities are not what they should be. They got to be different, they got to be better, and there is no reason why they are no better. So my question, even though it's late in the day, to all of them, especially I think, to Raj Rewal Saab, because he concentrated largely on buildings, how does he see this waves of vulgarity invading our cities? And how do we deal with it over a period of time? And then, of course, I come back and finish. So just continue for a minute and let us hear if any question, answers come through. Raj Saab?
Okay, I don't know if I get your question right. You see, what's happening is what can be called market economy. This is where totally illiterate, architecturally illiterate people, Philistine, who know nothing about art, design, or anything, are now the dominant people who commission architects, who actually teach architects as their chapatis or order them about. And a whole lot of, as Ranjit said, it's number 4, the profession, that we are creating also architects who don't understand the craft of building, don't know the aspects of design, political aspects, of cultural aspects, let's say. So I think this is why many aspects of our city, the building, are becoming so crude. Now, I think one solution, which I think not a solution, maybe there's no solution for that, but this pandemic has made me think that maybe, like perhaps Mr. S.C. Gupte or some of the earliest town planners had said, don't build in the cities at all. Confine them to the minimum, but have smaller towns, mandi towns, etc. That was the word used by Charles also at one time. Maybe so there is a potential of a certain kind of harmony. Let's say the last 2 projects which I have done are on the edges of the city, around Rohtak and Jagannath. Now, perhaps what we could consider is that, let's say, I was thinking about Nalanda University, that maybe when the Prime Minister had talked about 100 new cities, I had imagined there'll be really 100 new small towns. But what has come about it, I'm afraid, is that New Delhi is part of the 100 new towns because smart cities. So that is not what my concept would be. My concept would be, if we have to make 100 new cities, they will be maybe aligned with bigger cities at some stage, or they may be self-sustainable, like Mahatma Gandhi has thought about. Maybe it was utopian that you grow your own food, you make your own clothes, you live by whatever you have, etc. I think that's perhaps not possible these days. But I think a mandi town idea, that slightly bigger town than that, and perhaps where the dominance would be of architects and planners and not politicians. I don't know how that can be about. After all, economists, in a way, advise the government, eminent economists, eminent, let's say the lawyers, read the constitution. They are in a prominent position to change things a little bit here and there if the government goes overboard. I hope so. The situation. But architects and planners, let's say, I remember the time when Shafi Saab was there, who could tell off a politician. Kya kar rahe hain aap? With a little humor and this and that. And people listen to them. Now what has happened is, I mean, my 3 years in the Urban Art Commission, chairman of it, I could see that TDA, as you may have been, is like, it's been overtaken completely by political or sort of attitude. So I think the big cities, as I see, there is no hope here. I mean, if I'm answering your question, I don't know if that's the question. There's very little because we are not there. I don't know, Mr. Krishnan, you're an eminent architect, planner in Chennai. You have some influence. I don't think anyone in Delhi at all.
Well, I think I know it's very late, and I think thank you very much, for very interesting answer. Let me kind of wind up this meeting, and I must wind up by thank all of you, Sabiki Saab, Raj Rewal Sahab, Gurmeet ji. Thank you joining, even if you really kind of came late in inviting you. Thank you, Edgar, for wonderful, I think, presentation. Thank you, Krishnan Saab. Thank you very much. We're very sorry that we missed out on Doshi Saab because on technical ground. We're looking forward to his wisdom. Sorry, this couldn't work out. It's very unfortunate. Thank you for your time. Thank you for your interest. And thank you for your contribution. It was remarkable, especially at your age, to sit through a 2.5 hour long session is itself a wonderful contribution. Let me also thank Prem Chandavarkar for this agreeing to anchor this webinar. He's a very wise, very learned, a studious person, and he has been a great help. Let me thank another person who's not here, but who helped me a great deal. That is Professor Kirtee Ravindran, who helped me, I think, organize this. He's the one who gave everyone's address. He's the one who made me talk. As a matter of fact, I've never spoken to Raj Rewal Saab, never spoken to Krishnan Saab, never spoken to Sabiki Saab. So thank you very much. Let me also thank my colleague at INHAF, especially Studio INHAF. There is Ankisha, Kea, Rajesh, Elika, Shimul, and Nita for helping this together. We're very grateful for your contribution, and I think it was a remarkably interesting webinar. I'm not sure whether we're going to have energy to have a second one, but we're essentially planning 3 more on the subject, and we look forward some way for your contribution. So thank you very, very much, sir, for being with us and making this a very interesting conversation. Thank you very much.